Hello and welcome to Danışaq English. We're broadcasting from Washington, D.C. area, and usually we discuss the issues related to human rights and freedoms and as well as media rights in my native country of Azerbaijan. If you happened upon our channel by some chance, so you would know what we're talking about. Today we're talking about the cases of political prisoners in Azerbaijan and human rights, and we invited Thórhildur Sunna Ævarsdóttir. She is a rapporteur for the reported cases of political prisoners in Azerbaijan, and she's joining us live from Strasbourg, France. Hi, and welcome to our channel.
Hi, thank you. I am in Iceland, though, not in Strasbourg.
Oh, you're in Iceland. Great.
Yeah.
One of my favorite countries in Europe. Very nice to see you, and thank you very much for your time. I know you're very busy. Today on the agenda in Azerbaijan, the most important case is the case of political prisoner Tofiq Yaqublu. Let me start by this. Is he considered a political prisoner from where you're looking at it? And what do you and your colleagues, what's on your mind related to his case?
Well, Mr. Yaqublu has been on the radar of the Council of Europe for quite some time. I've seen reports dating back to 2016 of him being unduly harassed or arrested by Azeri authorities. And recently we have become quite concerned again with his case, with his treatment in the Azeri system. We had a statement, that is to say myself and the two co-rapporteurs from the Monitoring Committee on the country of Azerbaijan back in March, the 25th of March to be precise, where I actually specifically addressed his case, and I can just quote what I said then, which might answer your question. In response to the reported arrest and detention for hooliganism of leading opposition politician Tofiq Yaqublu, I said that everything I've heard so far suggests that the case against Mr. Yaqublu has been fabricated and that he has once again been made a political prisoner. So it looks very much as though the Azerbaijani government is launching yet another round of concerted political repression. And this would not bode well for the country's future standing in the Council of Europe. So that was the first statement. And we again issued a different statement, another statement in September, where we expressed specific concern about the sentence of opposition politician Tofiq Yaqublu, where the whole statement was about his case. So it's quite clear that we are following developments on this case, that we consider it very concerning, and that there are clear indications that the arrest and sentencing of Mr. Yaqublu are politically motivated.
Let me ask you this. This sentence is part of the sentence where you express concern and you even warned the Azerbaijani authorities that certain cases might affect their future standing in European institutions. We've been hearing them for a while, but it seems like the government of Azerbaijan either is not hearing you or it is not concerned with the reaction. What do you think is the case here?
I think it's a bit of a mix of both. So we have seen some responses, like we've seen that the Mammadov case has been closed, and the same goes for the Jafarov case. So they have completed the court's judgments on these individual basis, and that's generally what we're concerned about. And of course, what the Committee of Ministers is most concerned about, and they have a very strong mandate to enforce, to follow up on court judgments. So they have been following those cases very closely, and finally now we've seen a resolution to those cases. But let's not forget that the Supreme Court stalled the resolution of allowing them to run for election, meaning that they were not able to run in the last elections. So that damage is done, and it cannot be reinstated in one way or another. So you can see that the response is slow, and perhaps deliberately so, which of course is a matter for concern. However, what we've also seen, and perhaps what we are continuing to do, both the Committee of Ministers as well as myself as rapporteur, and of course also the co-rapporteurs, is to follow up on these so-called general measures that the court has clearly stated the state of Azerbaijan needs to implement in order to fulfill the judgments. And these have still not been implemented. So that is to say, sweeping reforms of the criminal justice system, setting up standards, norms, and practices that prevent the criminal justice system from being abused to punish or retaliate against human rights defenders or critics of the government. And this is something that is still standing, and it's very clear that the Committee of Ministers still considers this to be an open issue, still is pressing on these general measures. It's also an outstanding issue for the court, and it's an outstanding issue for my own mandate as follow-up rapporteur. So after my report was approved this January, I have a mandate to follow up and to ensure that the measures that we recommend in Resolution 2322, that they are being implemented. Now, I will be following up with the leader of the Azeri delegation in the Parliamentary Assembly very shortly about how far along they are in actually implementing these general measures that are required. So that's something that I will be following up on. Generally, what these kinds of organizations can do is issue warnings, request cooperation, continue to follow up on things that have been decided or called for, and to continue to exert pressure. We don't have a physical enforcement force to make states follow up on their human rights obligations, but we do have a lot of influential power. And I think Azerbaijan is the country that is the closest to exiting the Council of Europe because of its belligerence, because of its unwillingness to implement the general measures, but also the individual measures so far. So I know for human rights defenders, for people who've been witnessing these kinds of violations for years and years, and that it can be very frustrating, and you feel that no progress is being made. But I think the case of Azerbaijan shows that the patience of the Parliamentary Assembly and the Council of Europe can run out, and that it is running out. So perhaps it feels slow, but I think that Azerbaijan is playing a very risky game with its membership of the Council of Europe. And that is still very much the case.
You've been talking about the case of Ilqar Mammadov and Rasul Jafarov, both members, chair and a member of ReAl, a political party in Azerbaijan. To many observers in Azerbaijan, it seemed like the Azerbaijani government is doing the following. It's either arresting people or starting reprisals against them, and under the pressure from the European courts that take years actually for the case to be heard and for the decision to be handed down. And then they fix a particular situation, but they do not address the issue, the core of the issue, like they do not change the legislation to make future similar cases impossible. And at the same time, there seems to be a revolving door carousel. A person is arrested, international community pays attention, then the person is released. But what do you think is possible to do to compel the government of Azerbaijan to address not individual cases, but the systemic problems with their legislation you talked about, with the independent judiciary, etc., etc. You talk about the Council of Europe not having the enforcement power, but the Cabinet of Ministers can actually force a country to abide by the decision or start expulsion proceedings. Where you said Azerbaijan is in a precarious position right now. What do you think will happen? How much time does the government of Azerbaijan have?
It's impossible for me to say. I'm not in the shoes of the Committee of Ministers who have this very vital power. But perhaps I wasn't clear enough before. This is exactly what I'm talking about. No state has gotten closer to expulsion proceedings as Azerbaijan has. None whatsoever. And this is because of the Article 46 judgment, which is unique. It has never happened before. So it does show the seriousness behind these kinds of cases. And attached to that are these general measures that I'm referring to. These general measures you can also find in the Mammadov case. So there is the obligation upon the state of Azerbaijan. It is in the European Convention on Human Rights, and it's also in the it's also involved in the statute of the Council of Europe in the sense of these expulsion hearings, and these are intricately linked together. So the future of Azerbaijan in the Council of Europe is dependent on them implementing these general measures, what I was speaking about before. Sweeping reforms in the criminal justice system, setting up safeguards and protections for human rights defenders and vocal critics of the government, so that the criminal justice system and other measures of state force or control cannot be used against them as punishment. So these things are completely interlinked. That these general measures or these sweeping reforms, they are part and parcel of Azerbaijan's case before the Committee of Ministers being resolved. And they are, of course, essential to my follow-up mandate, because the focus of my report was not on individuals. It was not on individual cases. I mention individual cases. I point out that many of them, if not most of them, can easily fit within the definition of political prisoner. But I focus on these general measures, and I focus on the fact that these changes need to take place so that the cases of political prisoners will cease to exist, because they will have an independent judiciary that will not allow the executive to abuse the judiciary to punish opposition, right? So, of course, I think what has also happened is that the coronavirus has slowed things down everywhere. And that when you have, let's say, regimes or governments that use that position, use this situation to further repress, we are still also, the international community, ourselves a bit constrained in what we can do to react, because we are also not functioning as effectively as we did before. We are still getting used to this new reality. Things are moving slower. We need to find new ways of producing our work, of working together. So these things, I think, are also slowing down the actual response, because simply this has never happened before, and we're still sort of calibrating how we best work in this totally new environment. So I think the impact of coronavirus on human rights protection is twofold and massive. And it is in this sense that authoritative governments have been abusing the pandemic to further crack down on opposition. And then furthermore, that the bastions of human rights, that the institutions that are there to protect human rights, to respond to these kinds of abuses, are themselves restricted in their response and that have been slowed down by the pandemic. So I'd have to say that hopefully, at least by the beginning of next year, we will be back at some sort of full capacity, albeit perhaps in a new way of working. But by then we will have found out ways to have our assembly function without necessarily having to be there physically, with all of these new constraints that we have to protect the health of everyone who is participating in this kind of work. So it has been, regrettably, it has been something that slows us down. But I think that's happened to the whole world. And it is a very regrettable situation, but I hope it will improve very soon.
You're talking about the coronavirus pandemic, and from what I understand, your mandate expires in January of next year, 2021. I am
Yes.
curious, given the current timeline of the events, what is it practical to expect the government of Azerbaijan to do? I mean, in a perfect world, you and perhaps I would hope that the government of Azerbaijan sits down, reforms its judicial system, and implements whatever recommendations it has been receiving for years. But what would be reasonable to expect the government to do? What would you like them to start with if you had the magic wand and you wished something to happen?
Well, I mean, I just refer to our resolution, and there I think it is quite clearly stated what we would like the government to do. It's a bit long, perhaps, for me to be reading this out in this interview, but it's just clearly stated there that we need judicial reform to ensure the independence of the judiciary, and for that you will have a lot of technical kind of changes that need to happen. These kinds of boards of oversight and the ability to discipline, that these factors are taken out of the equation of being used as a tool to, let's say, discipline the judiciary, discipline the bar. There are all these ways that the authorities can use to get the bar and get the judiciary under their control and have them act as their agents, which of course they should not do. So those are the most vital steps to ensure the independence of the judiciary. But it's also, and this is not something that can happen overnight, but what is vital and what is really important is just a cultural shift. It is this change of mindset that the judiciary is not there at the beck and call of the executive, and that it cannot and should not be used to punish dissidents. And for this, you need education, you need training, and you need a reform in the way of what is to be a good judge, what is it to be a good lawyer. But first of all, you need to see these independent mechanisms, like that you cannot use, that the executive doesn't have access to disciplining judges, that the executive cannot fire judges or somehow make life very difficult for them if they're not doing things correctly. And the same goes for the bar. It needs to be a lot more independent. That is to say, the lawyers' guild, so to speak, for those who are not
College of Lawyers,
fully
right,
versed in legalese, so to speak. So we have that, and I think those are the most important ones. But of course, then you'd also need to just have a revisit of all of these politically motivated cases, which I think are vital. But I'd like to add that. So I think my mandate actually runs out in next summer, so not this summer, but the next one. Because of the coronavirus, I just forgot we have an extension of all of our mandates for 6 months because everything has been slowed down so much. So that gives us at least a few months to work in hopefully a normal kind of environment where you can properly follow up and you can really be actively and sort of full on monitoring and following up and trying to enforce these important changes.
I know you're very pressed for time, and this will probably be the shortest interview we've ever conducted on this channel. Let me ask you this at the end. When it comes to Azerbaijan, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. We're seeing the situation in Russia. We're seeing the opposition leader or opposition figure, Alexei Navalny, being poisoned and then recovering in a German hospital. Similar situation is happening to Tofiq Yaqublu. I would like to end with what I started. He went on a hunger strike. He is extremely sick and not a young man, unlike Navalny. And he's in jail and now he has been transferred to a private hospital in Baku. Do you think the people of Azerbaijan expect too much? Of course, we understand we're a smaller nation. We don't have nuclear weapons. We're not Russia. But the people of Azerbaijan have certain hopes associated with the way European mechanisms are working. Do you think it would be too much to expect Europe to move at least at a certain semblance of a pace that it is moving with Navalny in Russia with regards to Tofiq Yaqublu or be it other political prisoners, which are plenty?
I think it's fair to expect the same kind of treatment. But I don't think you will get it. because you are more obscure, because you're a smaller country and you are less geographically vitally important to the rest of the world. It has, I'm sorry to say, just much less meaning to countries like Germany, what is happening in Azerbaijan. And Iceland, I would say that very few of my compatriots could even point Azerbaijan out in a map, whereas everybody knows Russia, everybody follows what's going on in Russia. So, the attitude is, of course, understandable, and I think it's fair that you would expect the same kind of response or treatment. But if we're talking real here, I don't think that you will get it. I'm sorry to say.
My friends in Iceland definitely can find Azerbaijan, but there are not so many. Thank you very much. I know you have to go. Thórhildur Sunna Ævarsdóttir, rapporteur on reported cases of political prisoners in Azerbaijan. Thank you very much for your time. We're hoping to see you again.
Thanks so much for having me. Best of luck with everything.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you very much for your time today, ladies and gentlemen. It was the shortest interview on our channel. If you like it physically, become our subscriber. We depend on your attention for survival. We normally broadcast in Azerbaijan and Russian, and from Washington, D.C., I'm Ismail Jalilov. Have a good day. Bye.